Hey friends, Bethany Bravery here. Welcome back to another episode of the Bringing Her Hope podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to my friend, Alisa Carillo-Stafford. Thank you so much for being on the show, girl. I appreciate it.
Oh, I love it. You're welcome, and I am so happy to be here.
Awesome. So why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about you?
Well, I am a mother and a wife. The most important thing is that I'm a wife, and I'm also a grandmother. And we actually, after we got married, bought our house like right next to my mother. So I have my mother, a son, and a grandson all right next to me. And my other son got married right after me. So
Awesome.
yeah, I'm kind of all those things, and a daughter, and mostly I'm a daughter of the King.
Amen. So today we're going to be talking about learning to love again. We never know where our story is going to take us. We never know whether it's going to look like when we're a little girl, where we, walked down the aisle, we get married, and then there's happily ever after. But sometimes the story changes, and sometimes the journey pivots us. And so, Alicia, why don't you take us on your journey?
Well, it was kind of a long one, but about 1982, I met my first husband, and we actually had a child before we got married. We separated during that time, and then about 1985, we got our act together and we got married. But before we got married, we went back to church. We both got baptized together, and we kind of stayed in that pattern. And then we took our marriage counseling class, and then we got married. And we were not prepared anyway for that. We soon after had another child. So I have two sons. And then just struggling through the world as young parents, two wounded people that had carried wounds and did not know how to deal with them. So, but we worked through, we stayed married. We agreed that divorce was never going to be in the vocabulary. And I have parents that were never divorced. They stuck it out and stuck together. So I had that as an example. And his parents had done the same thing. So we had two good examples. But we worked, we managed to buy a house. We thought things were looking really good. We had the house, the community, a great job. I loved my job. He actually enjoyed his job. We had the cars, all the things that people think matter. And then sickness came. And when sickness came for him, it knocked us completely off our feet. It was like the rug was pulled out from under us, and we had nothing to fall back on. We were not prepared in any way, shape, or form for what we were about to go through. So that really was a ripping and tearing part of our life. And I wasn't prepared to be a caretaker, and he wasn't prepared to be a broken man. He didn't know what that was like. So it ended up really tearing us apart. And about the time that we thought things got better, on a Mother's Day, and there's a lot more to that story. That's a whole nother program. But on Mother's Day of 2003, he passed away during a nap.
So sorry.
So that unfolded a whole new life that I was not prepared for in any way, shape, or form. And soon after, my mother got sick. She was my dad's full-time caretaker, so that all kind of fell on me. She was in the hospital for a long time. And then my son, who was not dealing well with the fact that we lost our home, and he lost his dad. almost took his life.
Mm.
So it was kind of like this, like things were falling all around me.
Yeah.
And you just grasp on to anything to think, I got a handle on this. And the problem there is the I.
Mm.
When you say, I've got this,
Yep.
you're already in the wrong path, because it can't be you.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't realize that. I like to say I'm a control freak. I like things where they're supposed to be, and I like to make sure that I've got it all managed.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not manage a thing.
Mm.
But it takes you a lot of years to know that. And what happens often when there's something so tragic as that kind of loss, a death, the loss of your spouse, the loss of your father, is that you often either turn to God and run to him,
Yeah.
or you turn away from God and run away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, I leaned in really hard the first few months, but then I began to run, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran hard.
Mm.
I somewhat even separated myself from my children.
Mm.
So I just kind of moved all over, left a job, and, managed to get myself hurt, and had to try to figure out how to take care of myself like that. And I had heard about Cowboy Church,
Mm-hmm.
and I attended a few times. And one time it really stuck with me in 2006. And I remember standing up there and saying, wow, so many of these people are like me.
Mm.
I fit. We're in a barn.
Yeah.
I wore my boots to church, and sometimes came, right out of my barn. And I actually went through the sinner's prayer, and I felt it.
Mm.
And it had been a lot of years since I felt that. And that was the beginning of a way back. But it didn't take just instantly. And sometimes that's what people think is like, oh, I said the prayer, I gave my life to the Lord. But what they don't realize is there's some work that goes with that.
Yeah.
So you have to let him work, and you have to do the work that he puts in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do that, then you can get pulled right back into the world. So I did a little bit of that, and I kind of went back and forth, but I always knew I could run to church when I was in trouble.
Mm.
And I did many times. When I'd be out wandering, I'd run back in that door and just go, I need to be in the presence. And it was there. So finally, after my dabbling and running and getting about as far away as I could, and really degrading myself and not caring enough about myself to live a good life. 2011, I had been out riding my horse on a mountain, and I was coming down off the mountain, and I had done something, and something happened that brought it to my attention. And I literally got off my horse and fell to my knees and said, who is this person? I am, the shame completely just washed over me.
Mm.
The realization of who I had become came over me, and I just reached my hand out and on my knees said, Lord, I need you.
Yeah.
And he was right there. What I realized is he never left me. It was me that was walking away and that wouldn't hold on to him. He was reaching for me. And, he lets you make the decision.
Yeah.
And I had to make it, and I had to see some pretty ugly things before I got to that point. And shame is a horrible thing, because when shame gets on you and in you, then it will bring up other things. It is like a root that says, boy, I've been in here a long time and I just been waiting to burst out.
Yeah.
So all these things started coming back to me that I knew I had to work through. So I just began and I repented. And something about repentance that a lot of people do not understand, and I know there's a lot of people that do, but repentance is not just saying, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Repentance is repenting and then changing,
Yeah.
not going back. You don't repent and then walk back in the bar you just walked out of.
Right.
Because you just broke that whole thing you just went through. You don't repent and then go, hang out or sleep with the man that you were dating. That's not repentance.
Right.
That's walking right back into sin. So that pattern had to be broken, and that repentance had to be real. And that meant I had to take a step every day into that change. And every time that I felt myself getting drawn back to those old things I wanted to do, I had to say, no, I have to step a different direction. And it was hard because that meant cutting ties. So I could no longer be with the people that I sinned with.
Yeah.
I could no longer be with the people that were living in sin, that were walking in sin, that were, my handholders and my hangout buddies. I had to break those ties. And people aren't always happy about that.
Yeah.
It was hard. And especially in a smaller community that I was in, that it was like, who are you? Who do you think you are? And I'm like, I think I belong to the Lord. So, and they mocked me.
And was it isolating too at the same time? Did you have a new community yet to be able to transition to, or was there not isolation like you and the Lord were still, together with things, but isolation with that community of what that looked like?
Yeah, I did isolate, and I did have another community. I had the cowboy church community that I could turn to. And I truly was physically isolated because of where I lived. I lived in the middle of a tree farm. So I didn't even have neighbors that I could see.
Yeah.
So I had that kind of peace and isolation. But because of my situation, I was still living, even though in a roommate type of fashion, 2 separate rooms at opposite ends of the house, I was still living with a man that I had lived with because I couldn't get out. Sometimes you can't just change something. Sometimes you need to have money involved to actually go rent an apartment or, do something different. So that took me some time to break away. And that is where the perception of sin comes in. So even though you are making the changes and you are relating with the Lord, pouring your heart into him and asking him to move in you, from the outside, there's a perception of sin that people see. Oh, well, she's godly. She goes to church, but she's living with a man. And then that's like, oh, well, if it works for her, then that's okay. So suddenly I was at a different level, and I had to look at what I was involved in, or what it appeared I was involved in. And I could not lead in that situation. And I was becoming rapidly a leader in my church. And I had a wonderful spiritual mama that was guiding me along. But that perception kept coming back at me. So soon I figured out that however I have to do this, I have to do it.
Mhm.
And I was blessed enough, and I chased enough to be able to get a loan,
Mm,
and I bought a fifth wheel RV.
nice.
So from 2016 until 1 year ago, I lived in that tiny, it didn't seem tiny at the time, but if you live in it for 5 years, it gets
Yeah.
smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So I lived in that RV, but that separation and getting out of that situation
Mm,
opened the door for me to really go into true relationship with the Lord, and true leadership in my church.
mhm,
And I just became aware of everything. I
mm,
became fully aware of my temper, because that's one thing that had to go away.
mm.
Um, and it still bites me now and then, but it is not like it used to be. And to me, that's change and that's progress. And I really am aware of that. So as soon as I feel the little flame light, I try to get a hold of it and say, Lord, I got to give this to you. Move in,
Yeah.
take over. So that was one of my bigger challenges, was temper. Um, but sometimes I realized that anger was stuff that was from way back.
Mm,
It wasn't even something that was a current situation. It was a trigger that was some of those roots that I was talking about.
right.
So I lived in my little RV, and I got up every morning and I had coffee and Jesus, and I went and took care of my horses, and we talked about the Lord, and I had struggled with my injury a lot. So I was quite often I was not walking, and I had to use forearm crutches,
Mm,
which can really slow you down. But I, came from a church that really believed that the Lord, He is the healer. And if you believe it, then it can happen. So I had people speaking over me and praying over me and laying hands over me. And what I had to do is go, I'm going to take this
mm,
100% and believe this. And one night was the night. And my pastor called me out and prayed for me. And within a week, I was starting to lay down crutches and walk. So that was a real catalyst to say, Lord, you want things good for me. You need
mhm.
to believe that everything I heard is true.
Yep.
And this can work for me. I just have to grab a hold of it and believe. So that was a good stepping point, and it just made my relationship better with the Lord. I spent more time with Him in the mornings. And then January of 2018, I had to move on to a new journal and a new book.
Mm,
I will hold up. It became, this is the book.
mm,
So this book started out, and I had, for some reason, written about Eve,
hmm.
which I only just discovered the other day. It was like that page, the very first page in the book, had been hidden all this time. And I didn't realize that I had written about Eve. And then the next thing I started writing was declarations for 2018.
Mm,
And on January 4th, I wrote a declaration about being ready to be married.
wow.
So with that declaration came a whole nother session that I had to work out with the Lord. And that lasted a year and a half.
Mm,
And I had to, I knew that, I had declared all of these things. I had declared 12 things about my husband, 12 qualities that my husband had to have
yeah.
before he could marry me. I was saying things like, I'm a woman, and I've heard this from other people. I am a woman that's so lost in God that a man has to seek God to find me.
Yeah.
And I was like believing and standing on that. And then the Lord said, we have some work to do. So for a year and a half, I dug deep in my heart, and I asked the Lord to shine a light on all the roots that were in there. And there were some dark, heavy, deep roots that went way back in my childhood, hidden secrets that I never told, and things that I never acknowledged or wanted to, or just went on like, well, that happens, you know. So that went on, for a long time of digging those things out. And it was hard. And, roots are tangled, so they can be pretty ugly, and they can string out a long ways. And once you dig a root out, sometimes another one like starts to pop up. Yep. And it's just as entwined. So it took me that whole year and a half to let go of everything. I even wrote a letter in 1992. I wrote a letter to abusers, childhood abusers, and I called them out on it, and I forgave them. But I never opened that letter. I sealed it. So I even opened that letter, and it took me about 3 months to actually open it. I cracked the seal, and I even wrote, well, the seal is lifted, but I can't pull it out yet. And then I read that letter, and that just brought back a lot that I had to still forgive. And the one person I truly had to forgive was myself.
Yeah.
People don't realize that self-forgiveness is often the first thing you have to do. So I had to go through all these processes, and finally I had laid it all out. I had everything dug out. I knew that I had unveiled, in the old days, the women wore a lot of veils, and I always think of the temple prostitute, sitting under veils. Yeah. And I remember how Tamara went to the temple. Tamara went to the temple and tricked Judah by posing as a temple prostitute under all the veils so he couldn't see her. Yeah. So I had to peel all those veils off. Yeah. And then I realized that as I was walking around the church and leading, I still had a mask on. So they were only seeing what the mask that I put on that day. So I had to peel that mask off. And in order to not pick it up and put it back on, what I found out from the Lord that I had to do was confess to someone. So I set up an appointment with my pastor and my spiritual mama, who had held my hand through everything. And we spent 2 hours with me pouring out everything that had come to me, peeling off every layer, every veil, every mask, and destroying it right there. And I repented with them for all of that. And that was freedom. Yeah. Telling someone else, so you were no longer hiding. I would give people bits and pieces, and that was even the name of my letter. I would give people bits and pieces, but I would not reveal, the depth. Right. So once I revealed all of that and unfolded everything, there was no more root left. And I had the opportunity to fully have my heart lit up in every corner. And then the light started shining out of me because I was free. And that's when things started to change for me. Within 2 weeks after I had this meeting with my pastor, my unveiling, I had always gone to Cowboy Church of Oregon. It's a Tuesday night church and has been ever since it started. And it's still a full church service, and we had wonderful worship and men's and women's Bible studies, and but I needed a Sunday church in town.
Mm.
So I was sitting in my chair one day, Sunday morning, and I began to write in my book, as I always do. And the Lord said, "Get up and go to church."
Mm.
So when you get that in your heart, you learn to obey. So I got up and jumped into clothes. It wasn't anything fancy. And I drove to a church that I knew on the corner that had been kind of intriguing to me as I drove by. I drove by it every day, taking care of my horses. So it was intriguing to me. It was like it was calling out. And I walked in and I was greeted and I felt love.
Yeah.
And I knew the pastor was up there preaching truth, and that mattered to me. My pastor that I was raised up with, he's a truth speaker.
Yeah.
He speaks the word only. He speaks out of the word, and this pastor did that. And I just went, I think this is the place. And then I met the pastors as I walked out the door, and Pastor Diana Trujillo said, "I think we've met before." And I just went, yeah, I think I belong here. So I have been there ever since. I still went to Cowboy Church. So I had a double
dose
blessing every week. And then things just started moving so fast. Soon the City of Destiny Church that I started going to on Sunday asked me if I would lead a Bible study. And I had written a Joshua study during my time of searching for myself. I wrote about Joshua, and I had taught it to the ladies in Cowboy Church, but they asked me if I would lead.
Awesome.
And I thought it was a great opportunity, and I took off, and I did ask Pastor Tom if I could do that. And my church, Cowboy Church, prayed over me at church in service and released me to the kingdom. And it was like letting a racehorse loose. I mean, opening the gate, and a racehorse ran out. And I just started doing so many things, and I was involved in leadership. And I ended up taking a job that would lead to the horse ministry I'd always wanted to do. And I was actually at a Native American the conference, Convergence of Eagles, and that was at City of Destiny Church. Pastor Tom and Susan Crabb from Cowboy Church were there, and many other people and leaders in the community. And Mark, my husband, turned around from his camera and handed me 3 little like toy ponies from the Spirit movie. And I thought it was odd, but it's like, he just said, "Here, gift for you." And he handed one at a time over the counter to me. And, I was with kids and horses and women and horses. So I just thought, it's perfect for the ministry. I'll give it to somebody. Yeah. And then I think it was that night I had a dream. And I dreamed about those horses being gifts, but I was in revival with my parents, and this man came to my door and brought me gifts, and then took me back into revival. And that man was Mark. But I didn't know it was about Mark. I was grabbing a hold of those gifts and saying, "This is confirmation of my ministry." And I just grabbed a hold of that and ran with it. And I even had somebody interpret the dream and say, "Well, yeah, it could be that. It could be about Mark." And I'm like, no.
We're just going to focus on this part.
I just focused on that. And that went on for almost a whole year. In the meantime, Mark and I had worked in the sound booth, the sound video booth together for quite some time. As Mark calls it, we bantered. I say we argued, but he says we bantered back and forth, and we did, about how things were going to run and timing and, running the things that have to happen in worship service and church services. And we had done that for, a couple years. And all of a sudden, the Lord opened my eyes. And we actually joined in the men's and the women's group at church, went to the bow rack and did bow and arrow shooting. And that is actually when Mark and I kind of clicked and went, hey, we actually kind of get along.
Yeah.
So then it all became about, our relationship started with bow and arrows, going and practicing and buying a bow. I bought like 3 bows. And that's what we talked about. And that was the open gate. And then one night he actually came to visit me at my barn with my horse. And there was a emergency with my grandson that was pretty painful. And when I came home that night, I had an email. And that email was from Mark, and there was the most precious prayer over, because I just left him standing at the barn. I might have even asked him to put my horse away. I don't know. It was that kind of emergency. And that prayer just said, Lord, who are you putting in my life? It's like what you dream of having in friendship and relationship. And I started looking at Mark in a completely different way. The girls had all like talked about Mark and, joked. And my pastor used to say, well, he has a truck and he has a horse,
Check.
Yeah. He says that actually, I should have had 14 things on my list. 12. But that was the beginning of our relationship. And Mark has his own story, about his redemption and how things turned around and his freedom, how things worked for him. But God saw fit to bring our stories up and then bring them together. So we hung out with bows and arrows, and then hung out at the barn and emailed. I know that's kind of old-fashioned email, and talked on the phone. And around March, we started going, wow, I think this is something. And exactly a year after I had my dream is when I realized I was falling in love with him. And I was still a little nervous, still sitting back. But it just unfolded really fast when God said, no, this is right. This is what I gave you. This is what I had planned for you all along. This is why you took all those steps. This is the direction I gave you. It just unfolded so fast. He asked me to marry him. And he actually asked me to marry him in front of the whole church during announcements, for which he was so hung up. He had the hardest time getting it out. I knew what he was saying, and I just kept saying, yes, let's get this going. So that was recorded, and for everyone to see. So we had witnesses. And then a house came up just around the corner because we knew we had to have a home. 2 people living in an RV would never have worked. So we bought a house and we prepared for our wedding, which was in May. All this time, I was learning how to be a new and pure person inside.
Mhm.
We kissed after he put the engagement ring on my finger,
Mhm.
but nothing else,
Mhm.
because that was not a part of God's plan.
Right.
We were going to do this right.
Mhm.
So we stayed pure. And for older people, they're like, oh, that's an important thing. Or lots of people think, well, you should check it out, see if it's going to work out.
Right.
That's not the important part. God putting you together and obeying him
Yeah.
and living honorably, that's the important part.
Mhm.
And being a witness to that.
Yep.
So we stayed pure and until we got married.
Mhm.
And the enemy worked really hard
Mm.
when he saw that we were coming together,
Yeah.
because he loves to jump in and say, oh, wait a minute, I need to mess that plan up because they're going to be strong together.
Yep.
And that was rough. And Mark ended up with a sickness.
Mm.
There's a whole long story to that. And then being injured to the point that he really wasn't walking well when we were planning our wedding. He was taking a lot of falls, walking with a cane, had some pretty severe injuries. And he said, do you want to postpone the wedding
Mhm.
until I can walk?
Yeah.
Or, he didn't know what was going to happen. And my thought was, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
We're getting married. And we had planned this whole like Galilean wedding, and we wanted to have like a banquet, a
Mhm.
marriage banquet, and do the whole thing based on being the bride of Christ. And when he calls us into the banquet.
Yeah.
So we cooked and made a huge, huge meal.
Mhm.
Right up until they kicked me out of the kitchen and
Said, go get ready,
get
girl.
ready. The meal was being prepared, and I had wonderful people supporting me and
Mm.
loving me. Both churches just completely giving me all they had. All the people that had walked through this with me were there. And Mark actually has never had children.
Mm.
So he was married, but they did not have children. And he no longer had a mother and father. I no longer had a father. I think I forgot a part of the dream that was important about my father, and that was that my father met him,
Mm.
his hand, and looked at me with approval. And then we started worshiping in that revival.
Oh, wow.
So that was the final point of that dream.
You got his blessing through
I
that.
got his blessing.
Yeah.
And so we got married. We actually, our procession into to the altar was the blessing,
Mhm.
the song, the blessing.
Mhm.
And my soon-to-be daughter-in-law and dear friends at our church, they flagged and bannered us in. So they opened the procession with banners
Mm.
honoring the Lord. And I came through the doors at the perfect time on that song and made it to the altar. And during the time in that song, when they are talking about the generations and your children and your children's children,
Mhm.
my whole family stood up.
Mm.
And my soon-to-be new family with my son's, bride, we all gathered around Mark, and that was my gift to him
Mm. So
for our wedding, was family.
what an incredible story.
It was beautiful.
I've got to take us back a little bit. One question that I was thinking about is right after you lost your first husband, what do you think that running away was rooted from? Do you feel like you were wrestling with trusting whether God was good? Do you think you were wrestling with, your life looks different? What do you think that wrestle was, if you could define it?
Well, a lot of the wrestling was my actions during the time when he was sick. Um, I was a faithful woman my whole marriage to him until near the end. I turned to someone else after a tragic event with him. The pain in his body and the suffering that he went through had him turning to pain medications and other medications that were mind altering. And the enemy got in our house. And he actually had not him, but the adversary that was in him.
Yeah.
The pain meds, the mood altering, mind altering medications that he had to be on, changed him, and the enemy got a hold of him, and there was some pretty tragic fights going on in that house. And one night in particular was extremely rough, and my sons were locked in their rooms and I was locked in mine, and my husband was roaming the house battling. And he had just written a plan. We don't know that it was something that was going to happen, but he had written a plan about suicide, and that he wanted us to go with him.
Wow.
And one morning he wanted to drive to go get more medication, and I had not been letting him drive because of his condition. And not him, but something in him picked me up and pushed me against the wall to the point and lifted me. And when I looked at him, I wasn't looking at him. Something else completely. And I actually gave him the keys. And then I found the notes. He had practiced all night. So I had worked with a police officer on my board of directors for the organization I worked for. And I finally had to reach out and call somebody and get some help. And they came immediately, and we got a plan while he was out looking to get his medication. They got us out of the house, and we actually crossed paths with him as I was driving my kids to the police station. And the police picked him up just near our house. And he was so broken that they even saw the brokenness. And they said, he doesn't belong in jail. Help. So that was a whole another session of our life where we were separated. I didn't let him come home. He went into a psychiatric facility, then into a rehab facility. And when it was time for him to get out, my trust was broken. And I had already turned to, a whole breaking. I had turned into someone that I couldn't recover from. And I think that I ran because of that, and blame. I blamed myself. If I had done this different, if I had not, I felt like I broke him. So that's a hard thing to carry.
It is a hard thing to carry.
And then, my sons lost their father.
Yeah.
And there was some blame. So that's a terrible burden to carry. So I carried the shame of breaking my marriage vows. And I carried if I would have been a better wife, if I could have been a better wife, if I didn't put everything into my job, I could have been there for him. You start questioning everything. And that's not necessarily just your heart. That's where the enemy comes in.
Yep.
You don't have to even be living a really close relationship with the Lord. When something happens, the enemy goes, oh, I'm just going to keep playing with those strings.
Yep.
He loves to puppet us.
Yep.
And that's what happened. So he got a hold of my heart. And the wonderful thing, if there's anything wonderful that can come from someone's death, when we were at his funeral, my nephew, who was a young pastor at the time, got up and said, I was able to have breakfast with Robin, that was my husband, just a couple days ago. And he recommitted his life to the Lord. Wow. So that
redemption
was a gift.
Yeah.
It just changed my whole thought about, if there could be anything out of this, that was it. So I wasn't left wondering, I knew that was the gift. They gave me the gift of knowing.
Yeah.
So that was hard, but definitely, I stayed alone for about a year, and then I just ran. And that's all I know to say is I ran, and I started living hard. And that serves no purpose.
I love what you said, though, about the fact that, someone who's listening, I just feel it right now. Someone who's listening or someone who's watching is playing that recording in their head of, well, what if I did this better? Or what if I did this? And that's like the most amazing thing about this walk that we get to do with Jesus is that he has grace and he has forgiveness and he has redemption, and we don't have to show up perfect for him. Yes. We can do our best, but there is so much more to this. It is not a relationship where we have to earn it by his love, and so what a good thing to call to the carpet in this episode, and then at the same time to remind us that, what is the enemy's job? To kill, steal, and destroy. Absolutely. And he just wants to come in and he wants to destroy specifically relationships. And so watching how he tried to intercede and get in that, and you still, yes, we take sometimes the weird direction of not A through Z, but Z and B, all that directions, but he's still faithful to see us through. Another thing I was wondering, what did it look like for you to continue your relationships with your boys? I know you mentioned it was kind of a hard situation right after the loss of their dad and the shame that you felt. But what did it look like as years went on? I know single moms are wondering that question, like, okay, after that much trauma, what did that look like?
It actually did take some years. My younger son was, I believe he turned 16 after, and he actually had a horse, and she was bred and going to have a baby, and it seemed like it was kind of a project with him and his dad, and his dad died before that happened. So that kind of got left on me. He changed his whole life of what he was doing. My younger son got hard. My older son just kind of went and did his life. He did step up, but he was older. He was old enough to be an adult and be in the world. We worked together. My oldest son and I had the opportunity to work together at the animal shelter. And that gave us a good chance to build relationship. But my younger son was definitely really lost and looking for ways, and I didn't know how to help him. You think you do.
Yeah.
And you think you can do that, you think you can do tough love. You think you can do over love. But you can't. And he was dealing with real painful emotions, and behaviors that I know were driven by that event in his life.
Yeah.
And when he, wanted to take his life and did a pretty good job of almost getting it done, I can remember driving behind the ambulance. I can remember the desperation of realizing what he was doing and trying to get his door open and crying to the police at the same time to get there, get there, get there. And then the battle I saw when they got there. I mean, that was challenging. And then I worked, I had to work. And my son, once he had some treatment, had to be released somewhere, but he needed to be with someone that was with him. And I had to work and I wasn't able. So he ended up going to my mom's house and he lived with her ever since. So we had to build a whole different relationship then. And there was a lot of hard things. And it was almost like we all three went our separate directions with our own pain. So, I guess if there's any advice that I would give, it would be probably get some help. Get into some, we have churches that have family counseling. We have some great Christian counseling centers, or even worldly at that point, get some help. Find a way to talk about it.
Right.
And help your children. And I just did not know what to do.
Yeah.
I wasn't schooled on what to do in that situation. And, and then losing my father just a couple years, 3 years after my husband, I wasn't schooled on how to be a daughter without a father either.
Yeah.
So that was a relationship that I loved and I adored him, but he was rough. And then I was kind of like dealing with that. So it's like you get a double hit.
Yeah.
The most amazing thing happened recently, actually on our anniversary. And my dear sweet husband, without my knowledge what he was doing, wrote a letter to my father. And it broke me. But telling about himself and telling about me, and he opened with "Dear Mr. Morton," and just it was the most amazing letter. It was the most wonderful gift I could have received. And it's almost like it came full circle. He met my father in a dream. My father approved in a dream. And then Mark wrote the letter that, was the question he should have been able to ask my father. I'd like to have your daughter's hand in marriage.
Yeah.
So we have come full circle. And that is God.
Yep.
There is no other way. When you look back at lives, there's no other way that things could ever come together the way they did if it had not been for the Lord.
Yeah.
And the one thing I had to do during my time alone was I had to learn that I had to develop an intimate relationship with the Lord. And that word intimate hangs people up sometimes.
Yep.
But that is the truth. If you do not have an intimate relationship with the Lord, like he is your husband, then you will never know how to be a wife. So I had to work on that relationship, and I had to have a relationship with God to learn how to love a human again. So it's, if I said nothing else, I would say, develop that relationship.
Yeah.
And don't expect it to be overnight.
Yeah. And if he is love, right? His,
Is love.
one of his names is love, then the
Yes.
way that can come out of us is to be loved by him and learn how to receive that. I want us to speak to the woman today who she's in the waiting. Maybe she's never been married, or maybe she's been married and she's divorced, or maybe she's a widow, whatever it is. And she's, longing for Prince Charming to come, but he's not coming. So what would you say to her? How would you encourage her today?
I would say wait. Because the Lord has a plan, and we live in this thing called time, and it is not God's time.
Yeah.
But if you're developing that relationship with him, then he will develop the relationship for you. So I could say nothing more than just continue to wait, because if you give in, or if you seek out and go looking, it's not going to be right.
Yeah.
The Lord will open your eyes when it's time. When you stop looking on your own and saying, oh, he's handsome, could it be him? Oh, well, wow, he's fun, could it be him? If you're not trying to develop that on your own, then he will have what it takes to work. You have to release everything. You have to let go. See this?
Yeah.
Can't do this.
Yeah.
You can't be in control yourself. You have to let go. This is the most important thing you can see. Let go and let him do what he's going to do. He will tell you in your heart. He will tell you in your spirit when it's time. So the waiting, I wrote about waiting a lot in this wonderful book that someday I'm going to publish. But the helper is with us. So wait for the promise that we just had our, Pentecost. And that's all about waiting.
Yeah.
And we're waiting with the helper. See, we have the helper with us. We're waiting with him. It's like he's holding our hand. Think of it being like at an airport, and the Lord is standing with us, holding our hand, and waiting for that person to come off the plane. That's what it is. Just hold on to him and wait. He will tell you who it is. And not only that, he will tell that person.
That's true.
So that's what, keep waiting. Keep waiting. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't be led down a path. Don't give in to romance, because romance is romance with the Lord is beautiful. As long as the Lord is in romance, it's beautiful. But falling for the romance of the world, that's a path that you don't want to go down.
Well, and I think one thing in your story too was you were, I know you were preparing to be someone's future wife, and you were walking through things with the Lord, but at the same time, your life wasn't on hold. I think the word wait is, we think, okay, we have to be stagnant. We can't be doing ministry. We can't be, you were open posture to the Lord. What do you want to do? How do you want to use me even in this single season? It's not a wasted season. I think sometimes we can look at singleness as, oh, it's that dirty thing. It's not even dirty. It's just that thing that no one wants to stay in. But there's beauty in it. I'm guaranteeing you could look back and say, I can see how God worked in that season. And maybe it didn't look like he was going to, but he was.
I never sat still.
Yeah.
I did studies with Mid-Valley Women of Christ as a leader in my church.
Yeah.
I was working at a program upriver for wounded women. So I was busy sewing into women. I stayed busy all the time, moving into what was next. I wrote studies.
Yeah.
I would write studies. I did a whole series on the women in the Bible from a little different perspective. I kind of got stuck on the I don't want to say the bad girls of the Bible, but
Mhm.
women that people didn't look at as beautiful. The woman in Luke 7, I really felt like,
Mm.
I related to that. I related to Rahab. I related to Tamar. I related to the women that it's easy to look and say, oh, they were bad women. No, they were women that were waiting for God to use them.
Yep.
So waiting doesn't mean be still.
Mhm.
Waiting means, there's really truly something about be still. There is a time that you need to have stillness with the Lord,
Yes.
and he will speak that to you, and you will feel it when it's time to be still.
Mhm.
But waiting doesn't mean don't move your feet.
Mhm.
Waiting doesn't mean don't work for the Lord.
Yep.
You have to be out there sowing seed,
Absolutely.
and then getting the roots out,
Mhm.
digging those roots out and breaking soul ties.
Mhm.
Because that's so important, and it is hard because it's memories, and then we as humans, as flesh, we deal with feelings,
Mhm.
and we have to put faith over feelings.
Yeah.
So that's faith versus feelings sometimes.
Well, I know that our listeners and our viewers are going to want to connect with you. How can they do that?
Yes, well, I'm a Facebook user,
Uh-huh.
so you can find me on Facebook at Alisa Carillo-Stafford, because I did put my last name on there. So Alisa Carillo-Stafford on Facebook. And that's just Lisa with an A in front, Alisa, Carillo, Carrillo, and then Stafford, Stafford. There's lots of double letters in there. And you can find me there. And also, you can email me. And unfortunately, I'm having a harder time changing my email and getting my new last name on there, but at Alisa Carillo at yahoo.com. And I do check my email, probably more than my Facebook. But I will get on it and I'll stay on it. You can also often find me at City of Destiny Church. And then I am connected to the Springfield Women's Bible Study, and that's through City of Destiny Church. So you can ask to join that group, because I do, right now I'm doing a revelation study at church.
Very
And
cool.
we're using art and all kinds of fun things to discover and unveil revelation.
Awesome.
So come and join me. And I love to visit, I love to just visit. I love to see. I'm a feeler.
Mm.
I just talked about faith versus feelings, but God uses feelings when you feel people,
Yeah.
and you know that you have a piece that you can give them for their story. So, I would love to connect with you. I would love to, have you contact me. Let me know if there's anything I can help you. If there's a part of my story that you heard today that
Mm.
just want to say, how'd you do that? Or what can I do? Or do you have any advice? Or if you just want me to pray with you.
Yeah, I love that. And so for those of you that are driving maybe, or taking care of kids or doing laundry, we have all of those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for your transparency, for your vulnerability, for willing to just let us lean in on your journey today.
Yeah. Well, that's how we plant seed, is being vulnerable. You have to get out in the field to do it.
Yep, so true.
So, great. It's been a great day with you. And, someday maybe my husband and I are actually just on the verge of launching into a marriage ministry.
So
So,
cool.
yeah,
Love it. Can't wait to see how your guys' story continues.
it's going to keep going.
Yep.